Hey guys. Tonight, we slip quietly past carved sandalwood doors beneath swinging marigold garlands and into the perfumed dusk of a medieval Indian court. The air hums gently with tanpura strings, and you, still half draped in the day's chaos, find yourself seated on a velvet cushion beside a woman who knows a dozen languages, 20 dances, and exactly how to read you with a glance. No, you're not here to watch a performance. You're here to spend the evening the way she does when no one's watching. Because while the world remembers royal courtesans for their beauty or their skill on stage, their free time held its own private, peculiar rituals, and her bookshelf might surprise you more than her wardrobe. You'll be sipping sweet rose water as she flips through pages made of palm leaves, muttering poetry about bees and mangoes, occasionally chuckling at a grammatical pun or pondering whether that astrologer yesterday was high. And spoiler, you probably wouldn't last an hour in her day. Between her spiritual obligations, her choreographed routines, and her nightly debates about the ethics of metaphor, you'd be begging for a nap. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how many corners of the world this sleepy little history community touches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with silk brushing your ankles. The courtyard is wide tiled with cool stone and scented with wet jasmine. Fireflies spark lazily near the carved wooden pillars. Above you, paper lanterns swing gently, casting long shadows on the walls where dancers once moved like wind across water. She's there before you, seated cross-legged in a low pavilion, anklets silent, fingers idly tracing a petal on the floor. The courtesan's face is unreadable regal but amused. She has already seen you hesitate drinking in the strange surroundings. In this particular court, perhaps 13th century Tanjore, or maybe the Deccan Sultanates, depending on which historian you ask, courtesans were not mere ornaments. They were trained as intellectuals expected to hold their own in poetry contests, philosophical salons, and even state diplomacy. You can almost hear the scholars muttering. We still argue whether the courtesan's education rivaled that of elite male Brahmins. But tonight, no one's debating. She's already taken your hand. The scent of sandalwood creeps into your lungs. A servant brings over a tray spiced rice cardamom sweets and a tiny scroll tied with golden thread. She waves away the food motions to the scroll. Tonight, she says softly, we read for pleasure. And just like that, you realize this is not a night of performance. This is her time. The hour after the audience has gone, after the king has nodded off and the dancers have peeled off their elaborate crowns. Now she gets to unlace her persona, slip into something more comfortable. And for her, that something is a love poem written 3 centuries ago in a forgotten dialect, or a debate about whether mangoes are more romantic than lotus blossoms. She unties the scroll, lays it flat on a lacquered table. You expect dramatic prose tales of passion, perhaps. Instead, you get a line about bees. One bee specifically, who cannot decide which flower he's loyal to. A metaphor, you think? Probably. Maybe. She grins, says nothing. Because part of the fun is not knowing exactly where the scroll will go next. Was it written for a king, a lover, a priest, turned poet trying to woo his own muse? Historians aren't sure. You aren't either. But your eyelids are already heavier. Outside, the fireflies blink in unison like lazy punctuation marks. The scroll ends abruptly. She shrugs. It's missing the last stanza, she whispers. The goat probably ate it. You chuckle not because it's funny, but because it's very possibly true. You lie back, propped against a velvet bolster. Your neck relaxes. The room tilts a little in the heat, the sweetness of the air clinging to your thoughts like syrup. She hums a note. Not a song, just a single tone that vibrates into the silk floor cushions. The scroll is rolled up again, kissed once, and returned to its little lacquered box. Another servant appears, silently placing a brass dish of fresh betel leaves and sliced guava on a tray beside you. You decline because you're already full from the verse. She leans toward you. There's more, she says, eyes twinkling. That was just the warm-up. Of course it was. You should have known. This is the first hour of many. You are in for a long, slow, saffron-scented night of reading things that were never meant for you, and yet somehow feel written just for this exact moment. Outside, a slow breeze stirs the chimes. Inside, a courtesan turns the next page of the evening. You blink slowly, the air thick with sandalwood and late-night anticipation. The courtesan rises, her anklets chiming just once like a secret, and walks across the polished stone floor toward a carved wooden chest. It's no ordinary trunk. Intricate floral designs coil around its frame, and a single ruby glints from the clasp. This is not where she keeps her jewels. This is where she keeps something far more dangerous knowledge. She unlatches it with ease. Inside are bundles of manuscripts wrapped in soft cloth stacked like fragrant bricks of wisdom. And you begin to realize something no one tells you in textbooks. These women were archivists, curators of culture. Tonight's scroll is older than the last. Faded ink on birch bark, the edges curled like dried petals. She hands it to you, letting your fingers trace the grooves of the script. You hesitate. She nods. Not just dancers, she says. Not even close. Centuries ago, in the courts of medieval India, whether in the north under the Delhi Sultanate, or the flourishing southern kingdoms like Vijayanagara, royal courtesans were often trained from a young age in a rigorous elite curriculum. Think music theory, classical languages, dance forms, etiquette, and something no one expects, strategy. You squint at the birch bark scroll. Is this politics? She smirks. Close. It's a letter from a courtesan to a king advising him not to trust his own astrologer. You try not to look shocked, but let's be honest, it's unexpected. This wasn't pillow talk. It was power. The letter is sharp, cutting. She uses metaphor to soften her critique, comparing the astrologer to a leaky boat and herself to a lotus that floats unswayed. You think it's poetic. She assures you it's a burn. She roasted him, she says with a sleepy grin. And this wasn't rare. Some courtesans held so much sway in court they influenced policy. Historians still argue whether they served as informal advisors or were simply clever manipulators of courtly affection. Either way, they were literate, articulate, and not afraid to wield their words like daggers dipped in honey. She lies beside you now on her side elbow, propped face lit by an oil lamp. "We had to be clever," she whispers. "They let us into their chambers, but not their meetings. So we brought the meeting to bed." You think of the training this must have required. You imagine young girls reciting Sanskrit shlokas before breakfast, debating Kalidasa's metaphors over lentils, memorizing the moods of ragas before they even hit puberty. Not just dancers, not even close. She rolls onto her back, eyes closed. You're still thinking about that scroll. How bold it was. How different from the ornamental stereotypes painted in later colonial accounts. This was a woman who dared to challenge an astrologer's reading. And speaking of astrologers, she sits up abruptly. "Wait till you see what I have next," she says, grinning. You're not sure if that's a promise or a threat. She walks back to the chest, but takes a different bundle, this time wrapped in yellow silk tied with a loop of hair. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. "Some things are better not explained," she says. That or she just wants to mess with you. You're not sure which. This scroll is different. The handwriting is smaller, tighter, almost rushed. She holds it like something sacred and lays it out carefully. It's a collection of aphorisms from Bhartrhari, the philosopher-poet, whose verses swing between cynicism and sensuality, like a drunk at a mango festival. She reads one aloud. It's about restraint, self-control, the noble virtue of not giving in to desire. You both laugh, because it's deliciously ironic, hearing that from a woman draped in midnight blue silk, her fingers stained with betel nut surrounded by cushions and candlelight. But irony was part of the game. Courtesans often read and even copied moralistic texts for patrons who liked to feel virtuous after a long night of indulgence. They knew the lines. They knew the game. And they knew exactly which verse to recite when someone needed to feel just a little bit holy. "Here's the fun part," she says, eyes glittering. "Half of these verses contradict each other. You blink on purpose." Of course she smiles. It's all about context. One day you praise restraint. The next you praise surrender. That way the reader always feels seen. Now that's clever. A literary choose-your-own alibi. The oil lamp flickers. She yawns. You follow suit. But still your mind wanders to the sheer breadth of what she reads. Not just romantic poetry. Not just Kama Sutra diagrams. But political memos, philosophical paradoxes, moral treatises. And perhaps most impressively, she remembers it all. She recites a couplet from memory. Her voice is low, soft. The words are unfamiliar, but soothing. Something about the moon, a broken string of pearls, and a silence so loud it rattles birds from trees. You don't understand it, but your spine hums. This was her sanctuary, her freedom, her inner kingdom made of words. And as your eyes flutter closed, you realize reading for her wasn't an escape. It was a way to reclaim space, to become more than an ornament, to shape her own interior world, scroll by scroll. Outside somewhere in the courtyard, a frog croaks like it's trying to sing. She laughs softly. "He always comes too early," she whispers. You drift, lulled by verses older than empires, and a woman who never needed to raise her voice to make history pause and listen. You wake, or maybe you never really slept, just drifted deeper into the folds of her world. The oil lamp hasn't burned down much, and the night feels suspended as if time itself paused to hear one more story. She's still beside you, but now she's holding a different scroll, this one inscribed on dried palm leaves, its edges bound with thread, the color of turmeric. She doesn't say anything at first, just lets the scroll breathe open, and the room fills with a faint mustiness. Ink-old leaves and a whisper of clove. Then she speaks. Poetry, she says, but not written for kings. The courtesan places the scroll in your hands, her touch light but guiding. As your eyes adjust to the jagged script, you realize it's not court poetry at all. These are confessions, snippets, observations of daily life penned by someone less polished, maybe even another courtesan one who wrote not to impress, but to remember. One line reads, "He said I danced like rain, then he left during monsoon." Another, "The palace cat knows all our secrets and none of the laws." You look up. She's grinning. "We wrote for ourselves too," she says. Not everything was meant for the archives, and it's suddenly clear these women weren't just reading statecraft or high philosophy. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after the vina was put away and the incense had thinned, they wrote secret diaries, jotted thoughts, penned verses that no patron ever saw. Historians still argue whether these fragments were meant as literature or catharsis. Some say they were part of training exercises. Others believe they were private records of emotion and subversion. You, however, are content not to know. The mystery is part of the charm. She pulls out another scroll, this one more formal, bound with red silk and an ivory clasp. Now this one, she says, was written by a woman who got very famous for pretending she wasn't. The name at the top is in sharp, bold Devanagari script, Vidya. Possibly a pseudonym, possibly not. Her poems are clever teasing. They often begin in one mood and end in another entirely. She describes a mango orchard at sunrise, then compares her lover's promises to fruit flies. Ouch. As the courtesan reads aloud, her voice lilts between reverence and amusement. She pauses on a stanza about silence, about how quiet can be louder than thunder if it's placed in the right room. You feel that. You know, she says between verses, we memorized thousands of these. You raise an eyebrow. No, really, she continues. We had to recite them backward, forward, even when drowsy on opium and cinnamon milk. That part might be exaggerated, or not. Courtesans were often expected to be walking libraries, memorizing vast collections of verse from Sanskrit classics to Prakrit folk poetry. And not just to recite them, but to deploy them. In conversation, in flirtation, in debate. One wrong metaphor, and you lost your audience, or worse, your patron. It wasn't all moonlight and marigolds. There was pressure in every performance. Even casual reading had stakes. She rolls up the scroll and sets it aside. Then, without warning, she reaches for a small wooden box near the oil lamp and opens it to reveal a stack of folded cotton papers, newer, less ceremonial. She hands you one. It smells like ink and rose water. Letters, she says, we never sent. Your fingers tremble slightly. This feels more intimate than anything so far. The letter is written in elegant script, but the words are aching. It begins with, "If I had been born a little poorer or a little braver," and spirals from there into a meditation on longing status and the paradox of being admired but rarely loved. Another letter tied with a gold thread and smudged at the corner ends mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted or changed her mind. "These were copied and passed around like sweets," she whispers. "No one ever admitted who wrote them, but everyone knew." You wonder how many of these anonymous voices were courtesans just like her. Women with libraries in their heads, rhythms in their bodies, and too many thoughts for any one scroll to hold. Outside, the wind rustles the banana leaves. A gecko chirps, soft and sharp. You're not sure what time it is anymore. The night could be endless. The scrolls certainly are. And yet her hands pause. She looks up. "Want to hear something scandalous?" You nod, of course. She leans closer and drops her voice to a whisper. "Sometimes we made up poems and pretended they were ancient, just to sound more profound." You gasp dramatically. She giggles, covering her mouth. "We were very convincing. It's brilliant, really. When you live in a world where you're expected to be both ornament and oracle, it helps to borrow authority from imagined sages. A fake attribution to a 9th century mystic does wonders for credibility. The scrolls, the diaries, the letters, they weren't just pastimes. They were survival, rebellion, and sometimes they were just what you did because everyone else had fallen asleep, and you still had something to say." She leans back now, stretching. "I think that's enough secrets for one scroll," she murmurs. And as you drift with her into the deeper stillness of the night, you realize something quietly astonishing. You came here to learn what she read, but what you're really discovering is why she read at all. For joy, for mischief, for memory, and maybe, just maybe for you, a quiet settles soft as rice flour sifted through silk. You recline a little more into the pillows, and she stretches out beside you, arms behind her head, eyes following a drifting thread of smoke from the oil lamp. The mood has shifted, not darker but deeper, like slipping under the warm surface of a bath drawn long before you arrived. She reaches for another bundle, this one surprisingly plump, tied with cotton string wrapped in plain muslin. This one, she says, has some philosophy in it. You sit up, a little curiosity blooming despite the tug of drowsiness behind your eyes. She unwraps the muslin. Inside are thin, overlapping palm leaves bound together with a twist of vine fiber, each line etched with a metal stylus so precise it makes your own handwriting feel like chicken tracks. And then, without flourish, she starts reading. "Desire is the wind, wisdom is the tree, ego is the fire, guess which one burns faster." You blink. That's unexpectedly sharp for bedtime reading. She grins. "We used to play games with these. Guess the author. Debate the metaphor. Laugh when someone interpreted it all backwards." And sure enough, tonight's reading isn't poetry or gossip. It's ethics. Specifically, Jain philosophy, laced with clever metaphors and dense aphorisms about restraint, intention, and the mechanics of karma. She chews a piece of clove as she reads, her voice rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You didn't expect this. You're listening to the moral architecture of a spiritual tradition being filtered through the lilting voice of a woman best remembered incorrectly as an ornament of kings. It's disorienting. In the best way. She pauses on a passage about non-violence, not just in action, but in thought. The scroll insists that even imagining cruelty binds the soul to rebirth. You frown. That's a little intense, you murmur. She shrugs. So is passion. But we practiced both. The idea that a courtesan would spend her evenings contemplating non-attachment even while navigating a profession built on emotional illusion is rich with paradox and delicious irony. Historians still argue whether courtesans adopted these philosophies sincerely or performed them as fashionable displays of intellect. Either way, the result is the same rooms full of women dressed in gold discussing the renunciation of desire while reclining on embroidered cushions. There's something both hilarious and profound about that. She hands you the next leaf in the stack. Read that one, she says. You try. You really do. But the script is tight, the syntax baffling, and halfway through you're not even sure if it's a metaphor about breath or buffaloes. She watches you struggle with the serene patience of a teacher who has seen this play out before. You have to let the words melt, she murmurs, not chase them. Fair enough. She takes the scroll back, smoothing it like it's a cat's tail. Some of us read these to seem wise, she says. Others read them because we were afraid of what came next. After the music stopped, after the doors closed. You glance around the room. The quiet is more present now. The oil lamp flickers lower. A pigeon coos softly somewhere above, tucked in the rafters. Everything seems suspended, floating in a honey-colored bubble of slow time. She looks over at you. Want something lighter? You nod. The philosophy scrolls are fascinating, but your brain, soft and stretched now, is ready to be spoon-fed. She reaches behind her and produces a folded strip of parchment painted with red ink. The lines are curved, almost playful. This one is written in Braj Bhasha, a language associated with devotional poetry. This is about Krishna, she says, but not the warrior part, the flute-playing, butter-stealing, girlfriend-hiding part. She clears her throat and reads a verse about Krishna being caught red-handed in the dairy room, face smeared with butter, claiming the pot tipped over by accident. You snort. Oh, it gets better, she says, turning the parchment. The next stanza is from a gopi's perspective. Probably, Radha probably not. And it's about the absurdity of forgiving a divine prankster who keeps borrowing your jewelry without asking. It's devotional poetry, but it's also stand-up comedy in couplets. She pauses and says, "These were our bedtime stories. And now you really see it, how reading wasn't always lofty. Sometimes it was soft, funny, irreverent. The kind of thing you pass around after a long dance, still in costume, ankles aching, eating spiced peanuts and teasing one another with voices imitating Radha's sass. The line between sacred and silly was deliciously thin. You imagine them, these women, gathered on woven mats reading Krishna's exploits like tabloid gossip with divine footnotes. Historians note that Braj poetry was hugely popular among women in courtly and temple contexts, especially courtesans who were drawn to its blend of flirtation, devotion, and musicality. But whether they saw Krishna as a god, a muse, or just a fabulous protagonist remains up for interpretation. You yawn long and involuntary. She doesn't seem offended. In fact, she's clearly pleased. That's how you know it's working, she says. Then gently, she tucks the parchment back into its sleeve. With a reverent press of her palm, she folds it shut. Even God, she whispers, need bookmarks. You're half asleep, lulled by verses about butter theft and moral ambiguity. The breeze has picked up outside. The scent of night-blooming jasmine thickens. You can feel the floor's cool stone against your ankles, anchoring you in this floating dream. She leans back against a cushion. Her voice fades lower. There's a scroll about grammar next, she says, but we'll need more snacks for that. You smile. Of course. What better bedtime than one where metaphysics and mischief share a blanket? You're not entirely sure when she left the cushions, but now she's standing barefoot near the window framed by the moonlight sipping from a tiny brass cup. The shadows play tricks. Her silhouette blends with the carved wooden lattice behind her, turning her into an extension of the architecture, like a living sculpture who reads for sport and quotes scripture between snacks. She turns back toward you, ready for something completely unromantic. You nod, already halfway melted into the floor cushions. She crosses the room and selects a scroll that's thin, tightly wound, and suspiciously stiff. When she unrolls it, the script is small and severe. No flourishes, no poetic stanzas. Grammar, she announces with the solemnity of someone unwrapping a sacred relic. Panini's Ashtadhyayi, or as we like to call it, the scroll that killed the mood. You laugh, she doesn't. I'm serious, she says, barely hiding her smile. We had to learn this like scripture. Every rule, every exception. Backwards, forwards, and sometimes chanted during bath. And here's the kicker. She's not exaggerating. In medieval Indian education, especially among elite or temple-trained women, Sanskrit grammar was not just a nerdy elective. It was foundational. The Ashtadhyayi, composed by Panini centuries earlier, was considered the blueprint of proper expression. Courtesans, if they were to recite, debate, or compose, had to have it embedded in their very breath. She traces her finger along a line that looks like algebra for poets. You squint. Is that even a sentence? Kind of, she says. It's a formula for building sentences. Panini didn't write stories, he wrote the machine that makes them. The metaphor lands. Panini as an ancient code writer and she a living interface. It's all surprisingly techy. You start to see the scroll differently, not as dusty academia, but as a toolkit, a language engine, a cheat code for elegance. She explains that many courtesans competed in linguistic games assembling tongue twisters, constructing triple meanings, parsing syntax puzzles mid-performance. Not unlike rap battles, but with more incense and silk. One popular game involved delivering verses with grammatical ambiguity phrases that could mean 3 different things depending on inflection or word breaks. Audiences ate it up. Patrons placed bets. And courtesans, they trained for it like Olympic athletes. She sits back down, rubbing her ankle absent-mindedly. You had to be fast, charming, and terrifyingly precise. One misquoted verse and the pundits would eat you alive. You picture a room full of men gasping as a courtesan misspeaks a compound noun. Somehow it feels both absurd and completely plausible. Historians still argue whether courtesans were formal students of grammar or informal prodigies absorbing rules through oral tradition. What's clear is that many possessed remarkable command over language. And while male scholars preserved the theory, women like her preserved the practice, using it to seduce, to entertain, to survive. She rolls the scroll back up and ties it carefully. "This one belonged to my mentor," she says softly. "She used to mutter grammar rules in her sleep." You smile. "What kind of dreams does that cause?" "Very structured ones," she replies deadpan. You both giggle quietly. The room leans toward silence again. But then she reaches under the cushion and pulls out a slim booklet, hand-copied with faded ink and a cracked wooden cover. "These were my cheat notes," she admits. "We weren't supposed to use them, but everyone did." You peek inside. It's a hilariously annotated version of grammatical rules filled with fruit metaphors and mnemonic doodles. One margin note reads, "Don't mix up this suffix unless you want to insult your host's cow." She shrugs. "Real story. I watched a girl get banned from a feast over that one. Somehow it makes sense that a discipline so rigid would birth this kind of mischief." Learning grammar wasn't just about discipline. It was a game of survival, a dance between intellect and instinct. And these notes, absurd and lovingly worn, speak volumes. The room is quieter now. The scrolls are stacked neatly beside her little towers of discipline and wit. Outside the courtyard, moonlight spills silver over the pond. Somewhere in the distance, a vina player plucks a slow scale. She sighs. "There's a freedom in knowing the rules," she says, "even if only so you can break them better." You nod, heavy-lidded but thoughtful. There's a strange comfort in the idea that these women so often flattened into paintings or poems spent their free hours dissecting grammar, arguing about verb conjugations, and scribbling jokes in the margins. And now, lying beside a woman who once debated the difference between carote and criate, while painting her nails, you feel something rare in historical storytelling. Awe without distance. She rests her head beside yours, voice barely a whisper. "Tomorrow," she says, "we'll read about astrology and goats." You almost ask what goats have to do with anything, but think better of it. You're learning not to question the scrolls. They always have a reason, even when they don't. You're still curled among cushions, drifting pleasantly between grammar dreams and rose-scented reality, when you hear a soft rustle fabric brushing stone, a low click of lacquered wood opening. She's already up hunting for the next scroll like it's a midnight snack. "This one's good," she says, glancing over her shoulder. "It's got stars and small disasters." You raise an eyebrow. "Astrology." "Absolutely," she grins. "And very poor goat-related decision-making." You sit up intrigued despite yourself. The scroll she unrolls is surprisingly large, wider than the others, dotted with tiny celestial symbols, etched moons, and enough charts to make your sleepy brain twitch. The ink is faded to a brownish red, and someone, maybe her, maybe someone long gone, has scrawled tiny notes in the margins. Like, "Do not trust this astrologer. Has a gambling problem." She laughs at that one, then points to a smudged illustration of a goat tethered beneath a star cluster. That, she says, was supposed to be a lucky omen. Spoiler, it wasn't. The story unfolds gently, like the pages themselves. A well-meaning prince, overly fond of horoscopes, and not nearly fond enough of asking follow-up questions, consults an astrologer about the best time to start a military campaign. The astrologer, quite possibly drunk or just deeply committed to chaos, suggests a date marked by favorable goat alignment. Yes, goat alignment. Apparently, in certain medieval Indian astrological systems, animals, goats, oxen, even peacocks, were considered symbolic extensions of star behavior. The presence of a good goat in your compound on a certain day could indicate divine favor. The prince, encouraged by this cosmic livestock prophecy, launches the campaign. 3 weeks later, he's stuck in a swamp, his army demoralized and the goat missing, possibly eaten. No records confirm. She pauses in her reading, raising an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether the goat was ever real or just a metaphor for bad advice. You laugh, but the kind where your ribs still feel the echo after. What makes it sweeter is how these scrolls blend sincerity and satire. Astrology was deeply embedded in royal life, from birth charts to coronations to wedding nights. But people, especially readers like her, weren't blind followers. They read the stars, yes, but they also read between the lines. She gestures to a column of numbers on the scroll. This was my favorite part as a girl. Calculating birth charts. We used to guess strangers' birthdays by how they walked. That can't be accurate, you mutter. Oh, it wasn't, she replies. But it was fun. Astrology in the world of courtesans was more than prediction. It was performance. They memorized planetary cycles, lunar phases, lucky days. Some could read your entire Janam Kundali birth chart while painting their toenails, and sometimes she admits they made things up. A courtesan might invent a favorable alignment to delay a performance or claim a moon cycle as an excuse to avoid an unwanted guest. You smirk. So celestial blackmail. She shrugs. Call it strategic stargazing. She leans in now, unrolling the scroll further to reveal an intricate calendar, 12 concentric rings marking planetary motion across months. She explains each one like a lullaby. Brihaspati moves slowly, but brings wisdom. Shukra is fickle flirty. Mangala likes conflict and chili peppers. Wait, chili peppers. Oh, I made that one up, she admits. But it fits, doesn't it? You nod, feeling oddly soothed. There's a strange rhythm to this. The stars, the stories, the scroll in her lap, all rotating gently like celestial gears. She shares another tale of a courtesan who used a false lunar eclipse prediction to scare off a persistent admirer. She told him his love line would snap if he kissed her during Rahu's shadow hour. It worked. He ran straight to a temple and never came back. It wasn't true, she says, grinning. But he didn't know that. And I had more cake for myself. You marvel at how seamlessly knowledge and mischief coil through her stories. In a time when fate was measured in constellations, these women learned to read the sky and bend it just slightly to their needs. She picks up a small slate and chalk. Here she says, I'll guess your chart. You object sleepily, she insists. She asks your favorite food, the color of your dreams, and whether you prefer rivers or hills. Then she draws a wonky-looking star with several arrows pointing nowhere and a small goat doodle in the corner. She stares at it gravely. This suggests you will fall asleep during a conversation and wake up in a different century, she says. You nod solemnly, feels accurate. Outside, the wind is slower now. The torches in the courtyard burn lower, their flames smaller, steadier. The stars above are quiet, doing their ancient little waltz. She closes the scroll, tying it with a soft ribbon, and places it beside the others. Astrology was never about fate, she murmurs. It was about stories, the ones we told ourselves to feel less alone. You lie back again, arms folded behind your head, staring at the ceiling beams above. Goats, stars. Cheating the cosmos with one well-placed metaphor. It's a good night. You're sprawled now, deliciously drowsy, the cushions molding to your limbs like they've been waiting centuries just to hold you. Across from you, she's perched like a sleepy cat, winding a string of prayer beads between her fingers, not counting, just thinking. Or maybe remembering. Then want to see something ridiculous, she asks. Always. She stands gracefully and rummages through the lacquered chest again. A moment later, she returns, holding what looks like an oversized fan, but it unfolds into a wide cloth-bound scroll with embossed edges and tiny painted embellishments. There's a golden border, a peacock in the corner, and 3 stylized lotuses just floating, suspiciously decorative. This, she says, is a record of a poetry debate. You blink. Like a transcript, more like a scorecard. She grins. We call them Kavi Samalans, poetry salons. This one happened during mango season, so naturally it got intense. She points to the first line, a challenge verse. It's deceptively simple, something about love being like a river. You nod. Sure, romantic, water imagery, classic. Then she shows you the rebuttal, a snarky response penned in nearly identical meter, turning the river metaphor into a critique of fickle affection and weak poetry. Oh, it's on. They went for 5 rounds, she whispers, voice, half laughter, half awe. By round 3, they were arguing about the precise spiritual symbolism of lemons. You snort, nearly dislodging a cushion. These courtly poetry duels weren't casual affairs. Poets and courtesans alike were judged on cleverness, meter spontaneity, and ability to twist the topic unexpectedly. One slip in rhythm, one cliché too many. You'd be laughed out of the hall, gently, elegantly, but definitively. Historians still argue whether courtesans formally participated in these contests or simply influenced them from the sidelines. But stories like this one, backed up by records commentary and lovingly preserved scrolls, suggest they were more than mere muses. They were contenders. She hands you a copied verse, one of the debate entries. You try reading it aloud, but stumble on the rhythm. She corrects you instantly, tapping her finger in time like a metronome made of silk and sarcasm. Try again, she says. Feel the beat in your bones. You do. And this time, it lands. The words bloom in your mouth like a fruit you didn't know you liked. Good, she nods. Now say something better. Ah, the game is on. You falter, of course. You're no poet. But she waits patiently while you cobble together a clumsy couplet involving stars and sweet rice. She pretends to swoon. Mediocre, she says, but endearing. A servant appears with 2 small bowls of something chilled and fragrant lemon sorbet, of course. She offers you one and gestures to the scroll again. They once debated whether lime was spiritually superior to lemon, she says. It ended in a tie. The judge fell asleep. You savor the sorbet, each spoonful cooling your tongue, the citrus cutting through the thick perfume of night. The debate scroll lies open between you like a battlefield painted in metaphor and mischief. It wasn't just about showing off. These contests sharpened skills, built reputations. Sometimes they even sealed alliances. One particularly infamous match, she tells you, ended with the loser becoming the winner's tutor. He claimed it was voluntary, she adds, but we all knew better. In a quiet corner of the scroll, she shows you her favorite line. A verse about comparing a lover's absence to the stubborn rind of an underripe mango. You laugh until your eyes water. Poetry had rules, but wit could stretch them like sugar syrup on hot iron. And courtesans, they were masters of this tension, balancing reverence and rebellion, tradition and spontaneity. When she reads, you can hear both the discipline of her training and the thrill of her freedom. The room now smells of sorbet and sandalwood. The fan creaks faintly overhead, stirring the air like a giant hand brushing the room to sleep. Outside, the torches are nothing but faint glows, small amber eyes watching from the edges of the courtyard. She leans her head against your shoulder, warm and weightless. "You should have seen one of these in person," she whispers. The room glittered. We wore gold on our ankles and metaphors on our lips. You can almost see it, a semicircle of silk-clad poets and performers, their voices rising and falling like monsoon thunder, their words dancing just as fiercely as their bodies did. And in the center, maybe her, maybe someone like her, smiling at a verse that landed like a dropped earring in silence. You let the moment hang full and glowing. The scroll is closed, folded gently, and tied with a new ribbon, sun-colored with tiny bells at the knot. A detail you're sure has meaning, though you don't ask. She curls into her cushion again, arms loosely around her knees. "Debates made us feel alive," she murmurs, even when everything else said be quiet. The lamp flickers. The shadows grow slower. Tonight nobody has to be quiet. The sorbet is gone. The scrolls are stacked neatly again, and the night has grown dense and still. Even the breeze outside seems to be tiptoeing now, rustling the banana leaves like someone flipping slowly through an oversized prayer book. She hasn't moved for a while. Then all at once, she sits up, arms stretching toward the dark ceiling, her bangles clinking like lazy wind chimes. "Let's lighten things up," she says, reaching for a thin, square scroll near the bottom of a wooden tray. "This one's peculiar." You tilt your head. Peculiar is promising. The scroll unfolds with a little resistance, well worn and clearly well loved. She smooths it with her palm. "It's grammar adjacent," she warns. "But really it's about oranges and metaphors." That sounds exactly like something she'd say, and it makes perfect sense once she starts reading. The scene she narrates is set in a palace garden during a festival, musicians playing parrots, squawking cooks elbow deep in rice flour. In the middle of it all, a circle of courtesans and poets, engaged in what can only be described as a metaphor duel, but with a fruity twist. Each contestant had to defend why a particular fruit represented the ideal lover. You blink. "That's a thing." "Oh yes," she says. "It was very serious." You listen as the mango is compared to patience. You must wait for it. The guava to mystery unripe outside, soft within. And the banana. Well, the banana was apparently banned from poetic comparison after one too many inappropriate stanzas. You both wheeze at that. She reads from a passage praising the pomegranate, for it requires care, reveals slowly, and stains you forever. You shiver, not from cold, from how perfectly true that feels. It's delightful nonsense. And yet not nonsense at all. Because for these women, for these salons, this was training. A way to flex metaphorical muscles. A language workout disguised as citrus-themed flirtation. Historians still argue whether these games were formal parts of courtesan education or just playful diversions turned into tradition over time. But the scrolls don't lie, people recorded them. They judged them. Sometimes they even awarded mangoes as prizes. You sip from a cup of cooled ginger tea as she continues reading aloud, her voice growing syrupy with each line. She pauses only to giggle at one entry comparing the coconut to a passive-aggressive lover hard to open, full of milk and liable to fall on your head. But what strikes you most isn't just the humor, it's the depth beneath it. Each fruit becomes a lens through which love, longing, and human messiness are understood. And in the hands of a courtesan, even the lowly jackfruit becomes a layered parable. She leans her head on her hand, voice softening. We used these metaphors like mirrors, she says, to see ourselves and to trick others into seeing us more clearly. You realize she's not just talking about poetry, she's talking about survival. Because wrapped in wit under layers of literary froth, these metaphors carried real feelings. Frustrations, warnings, hopes. And when a woman in a silk sari compared a lychee to an elusive love affair, she might have been talking about someone seated 2 cushions away. She closes the scroll with a satisfied sigh. That was a good one, she says. We had a lemon pistachio dessert after that debate. Someone cried. It was a whole thing. You smile half drunk on drowsiness. What fruit would you have picked? She pauses. Papaya, she answers finally. Underrated. Messy. Good for digestion and scandal. You laugh into your sleeve, of course. The oil lamp flutters slightly, its golden glow pooling around the base of the scroll pile like spilled sunlight. Her fingers brush your arm absently as she sets the scroll aside. Want to try one? You hesitate. Just one fruit, she nudges, and one metaphor. Go on. Your brain stumbles around a bit before landing on grapes, because they're sweet when clustered, but sour alone. She goes still. Then she nods. That's actually quite good, she says softly, with the sort of gentle approval that feels like being handed a garland. The game fades with the moment trailing off like the scent of lime rinds on an empty plate. Outside, a bullock cart rattles by in the far-off street. Somewhere a temple bell tolls once deep, slow forgiving. The scrolls return to their tray. The room stills again. Those debates didn't always end with winners, she murmurs. Sometimes we just laughed ourselves into sleep. You stretch, mimicking her limbs loose and eyelids heavy. Tonight it seems you'll do the same. You roll your neck against the cushion, eyes half closed, now every joint, and thought softened by the slow unraveling of time. But she, as always, is already moving this time toward a small brass cabinet in the corner. She opens it with care, and from within extracts a narrow scroll wrapped not in silk or ribbon, but in plain string, and a strip of old fabric faded, ink-stained, unshowy. You sit up, slightly curious. No poetry in this one, she says with mock gravity, just grammar rules. And sighs. You groan in mock protest. She grins. Don't worry, it's the fun kind. Well, our version of fun. She unfolds the scroll like she's unveiling a prank, and you brace yourself. The writing is rigid, precise, spaced as evenly as soldiers on parade. And right away, the first line is a whopper. a list of 7 different ways to say go in Sanskrit, depending on mood, number, politeness, and cosmic intent. You blink. Why are there so many? She shrugs, entirely unbothered. Because verbs, darling, are emotional creatures. You laugh. Then she leans over the scroll and starts chanting the conjugations aloud, first slowly, then faster, like a nursery rhyme on speed. You're barely following, but the rhythm is oddly soothing, like water dripping in a pattern you didn't know you needed. Now you, she says, nudging the scroll toward you. You protest naturally. She insists naturally. So you try, and fail, spectacularly. She cackles delighted and applauds your garbled attempt. Better than my first try, she says, though I did get smacked with a peacock feather. It turns out this scroll is from her early years of training, copied from her guru's dictation. The neatness of the script, she says, was enforced with equal parts encouragement and veiled threats of extra tea-brewing duty. In some traditions, courtesans learned grammar not just to recite poetry properly, but to compose with accuracy. A misplaced suffix, a swapped vowel. It could be the difference between a love letter and an accidental insult to someone's grandmother. She flips to a new section, compound word structures. You barely keep your eyes open as she reads aloud phrases like Kingslayer, Avoider, Encourager of Spring Festivals. Totally normal words, she says, used for queens with complicated hobbies. The joke slips in like honey unhurried golden. You chuckle. The scroll hums with tiny jokes like that. Marginal notes that poke fun at the rigidity of the rules. Diagrams of grammatical trees that sprout birds and fruit if you squint. One section is simply labeled, Exceptions that made my head hurt. You glance over and catch her reading upside down just to show off. She notices your look and grins. Grammar was our armor, she says. You couldn't outdress someone smarter, but you could outparse them. Historians still debate just how formalized grammar instruction was for courtesans, especially outside temple or elite urban courts. But this scroll and the sly pride in her voice makes one thing clear. They didn't just memorize lines. They understood them, rebuilt them, played with them. Know the rules, she murmurs, eyes soft now, so you can break them like silk threads one at a time. You lie back again, the cadence of her reading brushing against your thoughts like wind through reeds. She reads a verse about causative verbs, and you don't understand a word, but the rhythm drags you along like a boat in slow-moving water. The scroll ends with a personal note, her own handwriting less practiced, more angular. A half sentence. I could say it right today. He noticed. You don't ask who he was. She folds the scroll gently, not like a relic, but like a well-worn shawl. I was proud of that moment, she says. Not the noticing, the saying. Outside the frogs start up again a lazy nighttime chorus. Your own breath falls into pace with the room's slow rhythm. She rests the scroll back in the cabinet, fingers lingering on its edge. There's something powerful in this idea that even in a world that measured you by your beauty, your grace, your desirability, you could measure yourself by something different, something internal, hidden, a verb correctly formed. You close your eyes just for a second. Her voice lingers, not reading now, but humming. A simple melody, maybe an old mnemonic tune. You don't need to understand every rule. You just need to feel the way the language bends, flows, holds you, and lets you go. The oil lamp is lower now, its flame barely taller than a grain of rice. Shadows nestle deep in the corners of the room, not menacing, just comfortably dim. You're fully surrendered to this night, to this space, to the slow heartbeat of silk and scrolls. She moves without sound, now fingertips trailing the edge of a smaller chest, a darker wood, less ornate. This one, she says quietly, is private. You lift your head eyes, adjusting as she unties the cotton ribbon. Inside are no scrolls, no palm leaves. Just a stack of folded papers, some crisp and new, others rumpled and weathered like old handkerchiefs. She takes one and offers it without ceremony. It's a letter, written by hand in ink that has bled slightly through the page. A graceful, sloping script interrupted here and there by splotches where the writer hesitated or maybe cried. You unfold it carefully. Ode to the moon that forgot to visit. She doesn't speak, just watches you read. The letter is full of ache. Longing not just for a person, but for the version of herself that only existed when she was with that person. It's elegant but raw, almost uncomfortably intimate. You lower the letter. Did she send it? She shakes her head. No, none of these were sent. The drawer is full of them. Letters never meant to be read, but also never meant to be destroyed. Half lovers, half confessions. Written during pauses between performances, early dawns, festivals, no one came to collect her from. Sometimes she says we wrote letters just to hold the words outside our skin. She unfolds another, this one crisper, newer. It starts light-hearted, even playful, mocking a patron's terrible taste in cologne and praising his poetry with hilariously faint compliments. But it ends with a single line. Come back before your scent fades from the cushions. You exhale, a soft noise just to keep from sighing out loud. Historians rarely mention these letters, and when they do, they argue. Were they real or invented as literary exercises? Were they written by courtesans or for them? But here in this room, none of that matters. The ink is real. The folds are soft from rereading. The paper smells faintly of jasmine oil and thyme. She lets you read a few more. One is addressed simply, to someone who probably forgot me by now. Another is signed only with a pet name, Little Flame. One contains a poem, just a single couplet repeated twice. You wore silk, I wore silence. One of us rustled. You stare at that one for a while. Your heartbeat slows. The night folds around you like an extra blanket. She takes a letter for herself and reads silently, lips moving just enough to make the words flicker against her face. You don't ask what it says. You just watch. Then she smiles sadly, folds it once more, and places it back in the chest. I used to read these when I felt forgotten, she says. Now I read them when I feel full. You nod, unsure if your throat would let you speak. She hands you one final letter. The ink is faded, the page uneven. It begins plainly. If you're reading this, it means I didn't throw it into the river. What follows is a list, not of grievances or requests, but of ordinary moments she missed, laughing at a clumsy servant, tasting cardamom in tea, watching the monsoon rise behind silk curtains. not the lover necessarily, just life when it was shared. When it. You feel a strange intimacy with the writer, not because you know her, but because you've also kept such lists, if only in your mind. She never sent that one either, the courtesan says, but she recopied it every spring. Same words, neater handwriting. You don't know whether that's devotion or ritual. Maybe both. She ties the letters back into a bundle, tighter than before, but not too tight, like something you plan to open again. You can love someone through paper, she murmurs. Sometimes better than in person. The lamp gutters once, then rights itself. A little flame still hanging on. You lie back again, but this time on your side, eyes tracing her silhouette as she rests the bundle back inside the chest. She lingers there a moment, hand on the wood. There's more, she says, always more. But for now, the letters are quiet, resting, waiting for another hour in the night when someone needs to remember. The letters are back in their chest, resting under a cloth that smells faintly of cedar and ink. She doesn't rush to the next scroll this time. Instead, she leans back, closes her eyes for a moment, and breathes just once deeply, like she's turning a page inside herself. Then, without a word, she motions to a shelf behind the low settee. You hadn't noticed it before, so understated, tucked into the curve of the wall like it was designed to be overlooked. On it sit several carefully rolled scrolls, a pair of oil-stained reading glasses, and one thick book made of hand-bound cotton paper. She picks the book, weighs it in her palms, and offers it with both hands. This, she says, was my library. You take it gently. The cover is soft-stitched at the edges, the title nowhere to be seen. Inside, the pages are filled with miniature notations, handwritten recipes, dance instructions, prayers, and diagrams of what look like hand mudras and foot patterns. This doesn't look like reading, you murmur. She grins. Not all reading is for the mind. Some of it is for the body, and it makes sense. Courtesans weren't just poets and linguists, they were also masters of performance, ritual, healing, and sensory detail. This book is part instruction manual, part recipe book, part secret keeper. She flips to a page illustrated with tiny line drawings of herbs. This, she points, is for cooling the body after a fever. Mix sandalwood paste, rose water, and a touch of powdered pearl. You squint. Powdered pearl. It's not cheap, she smirks, which is why we saved it for people we actually liked. You keep turning. One page contains a small poem about turmeric. The next details how to tie a sari to allow full range of dance motion. Then a section on voice warm-ups with notes about which morning ragas suit certain seasons. She leans over your shoulder, tapping the margin. That one, she says, is a tea blend for losing your voice on purpose. You know if you're tired of talking. You chuckle. That sounds devious. It is, she says, pleased. Historians often overlook these kinds of texts. Not formal literature, not political enough, not important. But in this room you see their quiet power. These were survival guides, reference books passed hand to hand. In a world that prized their public poise, these books were for everything else: injuries, illnesses, private rituals, and perhaps most crucially, rest. She takes the book from you again and flips to the very last page. There, in a looser hand, are notes on scent layering. Not perfumes in the modern sense, but herbal blends: clove for clarity, cardamom for warmth, vetiver to anchor your dreams. She reads the combinations aloud like lullabies. You suddenly realize she doesn't just read these things, she lives them. Her room is an extension of this book. That ginger tea, that incense, that tiny trace of rose oil behind her ear. They all come from these pages. She closes the book carefully and sets it beside the pillows as if it belongs near your dreams. Sometimes she says reading isn't about stories. Sometimes it's about remembering how to live. You nod, the weight of that line settling into your chest. Then casually, she pulls another small scroll from the shelf. It unrolls to reveal a long column of names. Flowers, mostly followed by Sanskrit descriptions and strange little symbols. Temple garland glossary, she explains. Each flower has a mood. Each mood has a god, or a memory. She points. Champa, used when asking for forgiveness. Tuberose, offered in longing. Jasmine, used when waiting. She pauses. I used jasmine a lot. You sit with that in silence. Then you ask, do you ever reread these? She laughs, a soft puff of air. Only when I forget who I was, which happens sometimes. You want to say something thoughtful, but you don't have to. She's already picked up the garland glossary and is reading the descriptions like they're lines from a sacred play. One entry reads, Night blooming cerulean, good for endings that never ended. Po, poto. That one lingers longer than it should. She places the scroll gently atop the cotton-bound book, then lowers herself beside it, one hand curled beneath her cheek. The room feels denser, now packed with quiet knowledge. Not grand declarations, but the small truths we wrap around ourselves when the world is asleep. You let your eyes close briefly. Scrolls of medicinal herbs, flower glossaries, tea recipes to silence the voice. These aren't the readings of performance or seduction. These are the readings that sustained her when the curtains closed, when the anklets came off, when no one was watching. The quiet has a texture now thick and velvety like the lining of a jewelry box. Your breath is slow, barely audible, as if you're trying not to disturb the scrolls. She's draped sideways across a bolster fingers, trailing the spine of the cotton-bound book she just closed. Her eyes flick toward a small wooden case nestled against the far wall. You hear the creak of the lid and then a rustle of something papery. No palm leaves this time. No stitched folios. What she brings over now is different. Lighter, rougher, the pages thick with uneven edges and childlike doodles in the margins. What's this one, you ask? She smiles. Animal fables, with morals, and a lot of talking turtles. You blink. You're not kidding. Not at all. She opens the page and begins reading aloud, her tone dipping into something playfully theatrical. Once a mango fell onto a sleeping mouse. The mouse declared himself chosen by the heavens and immediately began issuing laws. You burst out laughing. These were bedtime stories for us, she explains. We read them before rituals or after long days of practice. They reminded us how silly people can be. They're not just silly. They're strangely wise. The next tale involves a parrot who refuses to migrate, insisting he can outsmart the monsoon. Spoiler, he cannot. Another features a deer who outwits a greedy king by pretending to be possessed by a tree spirit. The deer wins, she confirms, obviously. You notice that every animal, regardless of intelligence, is somehow smarter than the humans they interact with. Or at least, sneakier. The message is clear. Beware the overconfident, listen to the quiet ones, and never underestimate a crow with a grudge. Some say these were folk stories adapted for the courts she muses, but we use them like mirrors. Mirrors, she nods. Every tale had a shadow behind it, a person we knew, a situation we lived through. We just used animals so we could laugh without offending anyone. Historians still debate whether these fables, some of which resemble tales from the Panchatantra or Hitopadesha, were part of formal courtesan training. But she insists they were common in her world, copied by hand, passed in whispers, read during shared meals, and embroidered into tapestries. Not official curriculum, just essential life advice in disguise. She reads another story, this one about a goat who tries to become a lion by growing a mane out of weeds. Everyone pretends to be impressed until a gust of wind ruins the illusion. The goat bleats once and runs off. End of story. You shake your head. These are brutal. They're honest. She shrugs. And they're funny. One particularly absurd entry features a squirrel who gets rejected from heaven for being too talkative. You glance at her. She raises an eyebrow. Not based on me, she deadpans. Some of the morals are strange. If you cannot climb the tree, pretend you planted it. A monkey with a necklace is still a monkey. When the wind scolds you, it's probably your mother in disguise. You wonder aloud whether children were meant to understand these. Probably not, she grins, but they're funnier when you do. She flips the page to reveal a hand-drawn illustration, very old-faded but still recognizable. A cat with a crown made of fish bones. Below it, in neat script, is the caption, "Appointed by appetite." I drew that, she says. I was 9. It's absurd and kind of wonderful. She tells you that during long fasting days, when temple duties were slow or the summer heat made dancing unbearable, they would gather and take turns reading these aloud. Everyone had their favorite animal. Hers was a crow who faked his own funeral to find out who loved him. The answer, not many. Sometimes we even rewrote them, she says. New endings, happier ones. You ask what her happiest rewrite was. She doesn't hesitate. The mouse gives up being a king, she says. He opens a fruit stall instead. The mango visits him every year. You smile. Why the fruit stall? Because she says it's enough. She closes the book of fables, slowly tucking it into a basket lined with dried marigolds. We liked these because they made sense of people, she says softly. And because no one ever expected us to understand power. The stories were playful, but the wisdom underneath was sharp. Hidden in the fur and feathers of make-believe animals was the reality of their lives navigating courtly politics, sidestepping envy, surviving flattery, knowing when to speak and when to play dead. You lie back again a little dazed from the laughter, a little dazzled by the unexpected depth of a crow funeral. The lamp sputters slightly but stays lit. She hums something low, perhaps the theme song of the Mouse Saga, if such a thing exists, and leans back beside you. In a palace of scrolls and scented cushions, the story of a goat with a weed wig turns out to be the most comforting one yet. By now your limbs are so relaxed they barely remember being upright. The stories have settled into your bones like warm milk, and even your thoughts have taken on that peculiar drifting rhythm of late night, a little looser, a little dreamier, stitched with laughter and half-remembered details. She hasn't spoken for a while, just watching the oil lamp with the kind of gentle intensity only tired people and cats seem to manage. Finally, she moves just a tilt of the head, a curl of the fingers, and selects a scroll wrapped in thin white cloth. It's lighter than the others. Bare, almost. "This one isn't really for fun," she says, "but we read it anyway. You sit up a little." She doesn't unwrap the scroll right away. Instead, she lays it across her lap, smoothing the edges with a reverence usually reserved for holy texts or borrowed clothing. "It's devotional," she explains. "Bhakti poetry. We used to read it during fasts. Not because we were pious. Mostly because it was the only thing that kept us from chewing on our own veils." You smile, but you can hear the weariness under the joke. She opens the scroll. The script is looser here, less symmetrical, more emotional. You can tell it was written in long sittings, maybe even tears. The first line is simple. "O Lord, I do not ask for love, I only ask for less hunger." Bhakti poetry, she tells you, was composed by mystic saints, wanderers, weavers, and rebels, often by women. It wasn't written in the courtly Sanskrit of kings, it came in vernacular tongues, rich with everyday metaphors. Cooking pots, monsoons, sorry threads, ink stains. And it was meant to be sung. She hums a line. It's about longing, not just for a lover or a god, but for something harder to name, a stillness maybe, or an end to yearning. Some of us read this during fasts, she says, some after heartbreak, some just because it gave us permission to want without apologizing. One verse compares devotion to standing barefoot in a river at dusk, unsure whether the current is pulling you forward or holding you still. You let that one wash over you. Historians still argue whether courtesans embraced bhakti poetry as an act of resistance or assimilation. After all, many bhakti poets openly criticized ritualism, caste hierarchy, and surface-level piety. Some even defied temple systems entirely. But here in the flicker of this quiet room, none of that seems contradictory. She just reads, softly, like breathing. One poem is addressed to Krishna not as a god, but as a mischievous friend who forgets to call. Another compares the divine to a borrowed sari that never quite fits right. You laugh at that one. She does too. You ask if they really believed in all this. The fasting, the metaphors, the gods that come disguised as cowherds and vanish into trees. She shrugs. Belief is a slippery thing. Sometimes I believed in the god. Sometimes I believed in the poem. That was enough. You read a stanza yourself. It's shaky, your pronunciation uneven, but she doesn't correct you, just nods pleased. Often we read this just to pass the hours, she says. There were times we weren't allowed to dance or speak. Ritual silence, you know. But no one could forbid reading, so they read. Not for performance, not for patrons, but for each other. Whispered verses traded like snacks. Favorite lines memorized like lullabies. One verse you read ends with, "Let my hunger be a lamp. Let my waiting be the wick." You let your voice trail off at the end. She's already resting her head on her arm, eyes half shut. There's a stillness in the room now that feels different from before. Not sleepy exactly, more like something sacred has been touched and then folded away. She closes the scroll carefully. You notice her fingertips linger at the final line. You don't ask which one it is. Sometimes the fasting wasn't just about food, she murmurs. It was about wanting less, wanting better. Outside, a dog barks in the distance. A cart rolls by on creaking wheels. The air smells of ghee and ash and wet stone. She shifts a little closer. Her shoulder brushes yours, warm and unintentional. These poems didn't save us, she says, but they reminded us we were worth saving. You lie back again, heart somehow both heavy and light. You didn't expect to find yourself here, tucked between sacred metaphor and sandalwood, but now you can't imagine being anywhere else. The scroll is tucked away just a ribbon now on the cushions. No more fasting, no more hunger, just the steady fullness of a night that has nothing left to prove. You've almost forgotten the passage of time. The hours have melted into each other like ghee in warm rice, and now the night is all texture, hushed breath, silk against skin, the distant chirr of crickets spinning their threadbare lullaby. She sits up again slowly now, like her bones have agreed to one last tale. Her hand reaches instinctively toward a lacquered box near the foot of the sleeping bench. It's painted with little cloud shapes and one very smug-looking elephant. She lifts the lid. Inside, a scroll with a gold tassel and two ridiculous feather bookmarks. I saved this one, she says, for when we've been too serious for too long. You raise an eyebrow, but she's already unrolling it. The parchment light and dotted with tiny painted symbols, swirls, flames, hearts, inexplicable birds. It's fiction, she says. Magic, talking statues, queens who ride swans, that sort of thing. You lean forward, only half mocking. I love talking statues. Oh, then you're going to love this disaster. The scroll opens on the tale of a fictional queen named Manjari, who receives a gift from a distant prince, a statue that speaks only in riddles and insults. The queen, naturally, is delighted. Her courtiers are less so. She spends most of the story trying to trick the statue into complimenting her. The courtesan explains. Eventually, she gives up and decides it's the only honest thing in the palace. You grin. What happens to it? Oh, she marries it, she says deadpan. Of course, it turns into a philosopher at midnight. Naturally, you listen. As she reads, slipping easily into character voices, Manjari's lazy drawl, the statue's gravelly sass, the shocked gasps of the royal advisors. The scroll is vivid, absurd, and somehow cozy. You don't even question the plot twist where a parrot delivers legal documents by moonlight. They wrote these, she tells you, when reality was too sharp. The authors weren't always credited, but many such tales have clear fingerprints. Turns of phrase that feel distinctly female rhythms, too conversational for the scholar poet's jokes that only land when you've eavesdropped on 100 royal dinners. She reads another a love story between a cursed mirror and a sleepwalking courtier. It ends when the mirror falls in love with its own reflection and shatters voluntarily. That one was banned for a few years, she smirks. Fictional or not, these stories carried a kind of freedom. In them, courtesans could fly, scheme, rule, vanish at will. They could scold kings, outwit demons, refuse marriage proposals by turning into birds. Sometimes, she says, we'd write ourselves into these. You blink. You mean, as the queen, she nods. Or the statue, or the swan, depending on the mood. The scroll she's reading from now is older, slightly faded with repairs along its edges. Someone has stitched it back together with blue thread. She smooths it gently. This one, she says, was my favorite. The tale is of a kingdom where no one can lie except the court dancer. Everyone asks her how she manages it. She simply replies, "Because I do not speak, I perform." You sit with that line. It hums. She adds, "I recited that at my first reading circle. I was 12. Everyone applauded. I thought I'd exploded." You smile. You can see the girl. She was barefoot, too many bangles, trying not to grin too wide. She doesn't read the rest aloud, just runs her hand across the last few lines, lips moving silently. You let her have that moment. Then she re-rolls the scroll and places it gently back into its box, tucking one of the feather bookmarks behind her ear. The elephant stares smugly back at you. These weren't just fairy tales, she says. They were maps to somewhere softer. Historians still haven't categorized this kind of literature. Too playful for religious study, too feminine for formal archives, too wild for court records. But here in this room they belong more than anything else. I think, she says, yawning, they were how we told the truth when truth was too dangerous. You lie back, letting that settle. A queen in love with a riddle. A mirror that chooses its end. A courtesan with a scroll full of wings. It all feels perfectly reasonable. She curls beside you again, whispering the first line of one of the tales, just the beginning. Like she's leaving a door open in case you want to finish the story yourself in your dreams. You think you might. The oil lamp burns low now, barely more than a golden breath suspended above its dish. Outside, the world is hushed. No wheels on stone. No voices from neighboring courtyards. Just the soft, rhythmic whisper of the wind moving through palm fronds like a lullaby, sung in a language nobody needs to understand to feel safe. She stretches slow and cat-like and reaches for one final scroll. It's unassuming. No ribbon, no paint. Just a roll of palm leaves tied with a faded length of indigo-dyed cotton. The ends are frayed. Loved, not displayed. She handles it like something that doesn't need to be precious to be priceless. "This one's my favorite," she says softly. It doesn't teach anything. It doesn't argue. It just drifts. She opens it. The script is wide and languid. The words are less like sentences and more like breath. A single stanza per leaf, each one gentle, quiet. The first reads, "The rain has not come, but the smell of it waits in the earth." You close your eyes. The next, "My lover walked through this courtyard once. The dust still remembers his weight." She continues reading, voice lower, now slowed by sleep, the ends of her syllables softened by familiarity. These aren't famous verses. They don't belong to gods or kings. They're the kind of poems that get copied late at night just for the pleasure of it, written in the margins of other texts, whispered to friends over bowls of spiced milk. The scroll hums with quiet things, rustling saris, monsoon clouds gathering above mango trees, footsteps on wet stone, the smell of burning wicks. Each line feels like it was meant to be read once and then released into the dark like incense curling into open air. Historians wouldn't bother with this scroll. No attribution, no big names. But you understand now some readings weren't for status. They were for surviving the ache of being human. She pauses on one verse and doesn't read it aloud, just traces it once with her finger. You wait. She says nothing. you understand. She turns the final leaf. Sleep is the river we step into backwards. I am already wet with it. Then she sighs, closes the scroll, doesn't tie it again. Instead, she leaves it unfurled, resting it gently at the foot of the bed, like it's staying up a little longer, watching over the rest of the night. She lies beside you, no scroll in hand, just silence now. The kind that comes when everything that needed to be read has been read. You glance once more at the room, the quiet chests, the slumbering scrolls, the garland glossary, the tea notes, the grammar rules, the letters that were never sent. Every part of her life a story, every corner of this space a sentence. She exhales. Her voice is barely a breath now. We read, she murmurs, so we can sleep without forgetting who we are. You reach out, touch the corner of the final scroll, the ink still warm with her voice. Then the lamp flickers once, just once, and the room softens into dark. And now the scrolls are closed. The words have gone quiet. You're still here, stretched out on the cushions. But now your breathing is slow and deep. Your thoughts folding into one another like pages of a well-read book. The last story lingers softly in your chest, not like a fire, but like the final warmth of a coal after the flame has gone. Somewhere far away a palm leaf stirs. But here in this small world of silence and sandalwood, everything is still. You feel the weight of the night in the best possible way, like silk, like cool water, like the last line of a favorite poem. The courtesan perhaps has fallen asleep beside you, or perhaps she's simply breathing quieter than before. You could ask, but you don't need to. There are no more scrolls for tonight. No riddles, no talking parrots, no debates about lemons. Just the deep, comforting hush of a room that knows it has held enough stories for one lifetime. Let your breath be easy now. Let your limbs sink. Let the words you heard tonight float behind your eyes like starlight scattered across a quiet lake. You're safe here. You're seen. And there's nothing left to do but drift. Sleep is the river, and you're already floating.